All right. Well, I hope you found that kind of interesting to watch a person talk while in an MRI. And you can see not only how active the tongue is, and of course the movements of the lips and the teeth being, important for uttering sound, but you may have also noticed this little structure here. I'm blanking on the name. I think it's the epiglottis, but I could be wrong. It opens and closes to allow air to come in and out of the sinuses so that you can produce different sounds as a function of air coming out the nose or in the nose while you're talking. And so this is a really important structure for language. It's your soft palate is the official term for it. And then of course you've got, your actual vocal structures down here at the bottom of the throat, things like that. But what I found the most, when I first saw this video, I was like, look at that tongue. First off, who knew your tongue was such a giant ball of muscle? I mean, who knew that that was happening and that it can stretch out and, stick out or tap the roof of your mouth really quickly. Like it's amazing. It's surprising how rarely we bite our tongue, given how active our tongue is while we're trying to talk. It's really surprising. We're amazing. What can I say? Okay, so let me move on to the structure of language. All right, so the structure of language. So the basic units, I'm going to start at the smallest thing, and that would be phonemes. So let's break that word down. Phone means sound. That's why telephones are called phones, right? Because they conduct sound. So phone, and then eem means unit, and then s means to pluralize it, right? So you've got phonemes, the basic speech sounds. These are the basic sounds that are going to make up the language. Humans, with that structure that we were just looking at between the soft palate, the teeth, the lips, the tongue, the vocal cords, we are capable of making about 200 different speech sounds. The known languages that humans speak, and there might be some language out there that that is currently being spoken somewhere and we just don't know, or it may have died off previously, but known languages range from as few as 11 speech sounds, 11 phonemes. It's a language that's spoken in the central area of East Papua New Guinea called Rotokas, and only 11 speech sounds in that language, as opposed to the biggest, the most phonemes is 112. And yeah, I've got a really bad accent in that language because I can't speak it, but I can tell you the exclamation point represents the sound. The two different O's, I can't pronounce those at all. And the X sounds like a sh. So it's sh. Nope. I have a horrible accent in that language, so I cannot do it. I won't even pretend. But 112 is the most. So we're capable of about 200. No language uses, even much more than half of the possible speech sounds. So we have a lot of sounds that we can make with our mouth, tongue, vocal cords, soft palate, lips, teeth. There are a lot of things we can do, and only a subset of them are used to carry any meaning, right? To combine into words. American English uses about 60 phonemes. So I'm giving you abouts because people have accents here in the US, and so it varies between people, but about 60 speech sounds. So, oops, my little box is messed up and I can't take it. Let me get my box fixed. Here we go. We got one word there, psychology, and then I want this to be, I messed it up. I hate when my little slide production is just not up to par. I hate when that happens. Okay, now we've got the word psychology. All right, so we've got the word psychology. Now I'm going to try and break it down. See, it's also overlapping. Sorry, I can't. There we go. All right. I can't take it. I don't know why I didn't notice it while I was producing it. So I tried to spell like phonetically the sounds that are involved in the word psychology. So you got this S, the I put a Y there for that. J, E. So those would be the phonemes. And actually there are oh gosh, I'm trying to remember the names. It has crit at the end of it. Diacrits, little sound, little annotations that make these different sounds, and you're supposed to be able to look at them and know how to pronounce that word because that diacrit is written there. I'm not very good with those, so I went ahead and just sort of phonetically spelled it out for us. But if you notice, like for example, the P is silent, so there's no P on this list. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 basic phonemes making up the word psychology. Now, in this particular, even though some of the letters are duplicated, like the O and the Y are duplicated, you'll notice they are not phonetically duplicated, right? The first Y sounds like an I, the second Y sounds like an E. The first O sounds like ah, right? And the psychology, psychology, right? Different sounds for those O's. And so you're seeing almost as many phonemes as there are letters in the word in this particular case. In some words, you might see that the same phoneme is repeated, and so we wouldn't count those twice. We'd say, well, there's only this many phonemes, because if you're using the same basic sound, we wouldn't count it twice, even though it's appearing twice in the word. And so that's part of in Rhotokus, the 11 speech sounds are combined in lots of different ways to produce lots of different words. All right, so I will put in the playlist this video that shows how children start to tune into phonemes and they start to learn to distinguish phonemes. It's something that happens really early in our infancy. We start to respond to different speech sounds. And so it's a really important little video for you to watch. So I'll have that queued up in the playlist coming after this. Now, morphemes, okay, you already know what eames means, right? So units. Morph means body. So if you've ever, thought of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, morph technically means body. And in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, they usually mean that they have, tough little bodies. There's also, you might have heard the word to morph something, like to change it. And what they're saying is that its basic shape has changed. So morph means body. So morphemes are the smallest units that carry meaning. So it's like the body of meaning, right? The part, the structure that carries meaning. This is going to include like root words, prefixes, suffixes, right? Any of those components of a word. So I've been pointing out morphemes as I've been trying to explain to you what a phoneme is, right? So phone is a morpheme. Eem is a morpheme. S in this context is a morpheme because it means to pluralize it, right? So actually in this little list, roots, S is a morpheme, root is a morpheme, right? So it's not syllables. I oftentimes have students confused and they think morphemes and syllables are equivalent because you're dividing up the word. It's not the same thing. A lot of times a morpheme is made up of more than one syllable. So you got to be really careful about sort of making that, thinking of them as synonyms or not. A morpheme and a syllable are definitely two different things. So here we are. Oh, my psychology's messed up again. What is up with my boxes? I don't understand. All right, here we go. So here we are with our word psychology again. And it can be broken up into two morphemes. Psych is a morpheme that means like mental. And then ology is the study of, right? So even though ology is more than one syllable, remember it's that meaning unit. So ology means one coherent thing, and so you can't really separate it. So that's how you would divide the word psychology into its morphemes. Now some higher levels of linguistic analysis. So when we start going into the higher levels of linguistic analysis, we're going to get out of the letters or the sounds or the meaning units, and we're going to go into like whole words or even whole phrases or even a whole prose passage as we're getting like the overarching understanding of this whole essay or chapter or something like that. So it can, higher levels of linguistic analysis can really encompass really large pieces of work. One of the things that is part of the higher level of linguistic analysis would be our grammar rules. Grammar rules include things like syntax. How are the words within a sentence supposed to be ordered so that this sentence will make sense to the listener? Sometimes when we're speaking on the fly, our sentences are not ordered perfectly. But luckily, usually if we're speaking, the listener can kind of, from context, figure out, where you're going. Maybe you pause after a word that you realize, I probably should have said that earlier in the sentence. And it gives the listener a second to catch up and figure out where you are. So sometimes we violate the syntax rules a little bit, but we don't usually violate the basic syntax rules. And these are things that, you might have been taught this if you took English grammar kinds of classes when you were a child. I don't know if they even still do English grammar classes. By the time I was in school, they had gotten rid of like parsing sentences and things like that. We didn't have to do that stuff. But we were supposed to know what is a noun, what is an adjective, what's an adverb, what's a verb, what's a part, an article, like we were supposed to know the basic, like what were these words that make up sentences. And I never really understood why they were bothering to tell us all of this. We already all speak the language. Like, why are you making us break it down and understand the syntax of the language? I didn't know that word back then, but why are you trying to make us understand the syntax? But it's important that whether your school marm taught it to you or you just learned how to speak your native language and you're applying the syntax naturally, the important thing is that people tend to order words within a sentence in a very predictable way that is in keeping with what their language demands. So let me give you an example. In English, we tend to put our adjectives in front of our nouns. So I might tell you that I live in a yellow house. So I put the adjective yellow prior to the noun house. In Spanish, you put the noun before the adjective. So if I were to say in English, the literal translation of something I might say in Spanish, I would say, I live in a house yellow. So in English, you don't want to say, I live in a house yellow. And in Spanish, you don't want to say, I live in a yellow house. Like, the listener will be a little bit perplexed if you put those words out of order, given the grammar of the language. Right? You have to follow the syntax rules in order to correctly apply the grammar of the language. So for those of us who have a little bit of a second language, maybe you're in the process of learning your second language right now. Maybe you've been immersed into a second language. It's hard to apply the syntax of a new language on the fly. And so you might make mistakes. The good news is that the listener usually can catch up and figure out what you meant. And it might take them a beat, it might take them a second to realize what you're saying, but usually we are able to understand even if the syntax rules aren't completely perfectly applied. This is good because sometimes in very early childhood, when toddlers are first starting to put their first two words together, they will violate the syntax rules in order to convey what might be more meaningful. Like, for example, they may have only two words and they may be wanting to say, throw the ball to me, Dad, but they can't say that. So they may say, throw ball or throw daddy. And they may use the order to make it really clear that they're telling him that rather than asking him, Daddy, throw? Right? And they put that little intonation, but the order of the words helps the listener to know whether the child is asking a question or making a statement or a request. Right? So order of words. So it's a good thing that we're kind of flexible on that, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to understand anything that a small child was trying to say unless it was following perfectly the syntax rules. So we are pretty flexible. I just always like to encourage people. I've gone, with my attempt to be bilingual, which is not good. I spent years and years studying Spanish, but it's here in the US. And so I went and immersed myself in Mexico, and people were super tolerant. They were very tolerant of my very poor syntax. Um, so, ordering the words within a sentence, I very often put my adjectives before my nouns because I'm trying to think of the words and I was just trying to structure my sentences and I was messing it up because it's hard. Semantics talks about how we derive meaning from language, whether it's spoken language or written language. We use these semantic rules to help us to figure out what the speaker or the writer is trying to say, right? So there are certain rules that go along with semantics. Let's see if I have them. Yeah, here we are. I just edited these yesterday, and it's funny that I'm acting surprised by what's coming up. I just worked on these yesterday. So the semantics would be the rules for deriving meaning. Why do we need them? Well, there are two types of structure in any kind of verbal message. Again, whether it's spoken or it's written, doesn't matter. There's two kinds of structure. The surface structure would be the words that are actually being used. And then the deep structure is the meaning underlying those words. So here we have what's called synonymous surface structure and deep structure. So what synonymous means is that it doesn't matter which way you're phrasing this, it'll still it'll make sense to you. So Bill kissed Jane is heard the same as Jane was kissed by Bill, right? The surface structure and the deep structure match in this. So it doesn't really matter. I'm sorry, the surface structure doesn't match, but the deep structure does. It doesn't matter what order. I was being distracted by the fact that my box isn't big enough again, and it's driving me crazy. I don't know what is going on with my thing here, but it's very much driving me crazy. So the surface structure can vary, but the deep structure can be the same. And so, hold on, there we go. All right. And so with that happening, it doesn't matter which way you go. So if I say I have a yellow house, or I say I have a house yellow, it's really still the same, even if I say it, even if one is grammatically correct and the other one's not. To make it grammatically correct in English, I could say I live in a yellow house, or I live in a house that is yellow, right? Just add some more words to it and suddenly it's grammatically correct again. It's okay to have a surface structure that differs. It's considered synonymous if the deep structure matches. It's considered ambiguous when, let's look at this phrase, visiting relatives can be a nuisance. It's considered ambiguous when the surface structure matches, like this is what I said, but it can mean more than one thing. In this particular sentence, going to visit relatives can be a nuisance. That could be what I mean. Or I could mean having relatives visit can be a nuisance. Having a surface structure that matches, but multiple interpretations, that's called ambiguous sentence structure. This is just one good example of why we rely so heavily on semantics to help us to figure out what the person in this kind of ambiguous situation, what the person means. So if they're cleaning their house and changing the linen on the guest bed and doing all this stuff and they go, wow, visiting relatives can be a nuisance. That context is going to help us to understand that they're referring to the fact that the relatives are coming to visit them. If, on the other hand, they're packing their bags and getting the kids' stuff together and trying to, plan out their flights, and they say visiting relatives can be a nuisance, well, I'm going to guess that they're going to visit relatives, right? Like context is going to help us to figure it out. And so this is one of the reasons why semantics are so important. We need to have things like context to fall back on to help us to understand, especially in these ambiguous kinds of structures. All right. I think I've been talking for a little while. I lost track of time. So we'll come back in the next section. I'm going to queue up that video that I want you to watch about babies starting to recognize phonemes. And then after that, you'll come back and we'll talk about pragmatics.